Hi everybody, welcome to another Storytime with Sid. It is me, Sidney of Hightower. As always, welcome. I don't know why I did that, but we're just gonna go with it. I just wanted to say hi. I miss you guys, and I'm glad that you're back for another story. So, as I said last week, I would have a very special story planned for today. This one is called Auntie Toothache, and this is really interesting to me because I have always loved the legend of the Tooth Fairy, and so I'm hoping that this story has something to do with that, because the Tooth Fairy is so interesting to me, because the thought of a fairy going and helping a mortal child by giving them a coin for their tooth is fascinating to me. I don't know if tooth fairies exist because I've never seen one, but I know certainly fairies do exist, so it kind of makes sense that there would be one that's just kind of obsessed with dental care. So, this is called Auntie Toothache. Where did we get this story? Do you want to know? We got it from the barrel, well, the one with the old paper in it. Many a good and rare book has ended up in the grocer's or the delicatessen, not as reading material, but as a basic necessity. They needed to make paper twists to hold starch and coffee beans, and as wrapping paper for salt herring, butter, and cheese. Handwritten materials can also be used. Things often end up in the bin that shouldn't be in the bin. I know a grocery boy, the son of a delicatessen owner. He rose up from working in the cellar of the main shop. A boy who has read widely, paper twist reading, both printed and handwritten. He has an interesting collection that includes many important documents from the waste-keep baskets of various busy and absent-minded civil servants. Several confidential letters from one girlfriend to another, scandalous reports that were not meant to go any further, were not meant to be discussed with anyone else. He's a regular rescue society for a not insignificant segment of literature that covers many topics. He has access to the shops of both his parents and employer, and there he has rescued many a book or pages of a book that would be worth reading twice. He showed me his collection of printed and handwritten materials from the bin, the richest items coming from the delicatessen. There were several pages from a lengthy diary. The handwriting was particularly beautiful and clear. It attracted my attention at once. "The student wrote that," he said. "The student who lived right across the street and died a month ago. He suffered from a terrible toothache, as you can see. It's quite amusing to read. There's only a small amount left of what he wrote. It used to be a whole book, and even a little more than that. My parents gave the student's landlady half a pound of green soap for it. Here's what I've managed to salvage." I borrowed it. I read it, and now I'm going to tell you what it said. The title was Auntie Toothache. Chapter 1. Auntie gave me sweets when I was little. My teeth survived. They didn't get damaged. Now I've grown up and become a student. She still spoils me with sweets and tells me I'm a poet. I have something of the poet in me, but not enough. Often when I walk along the city streets, I feel as if I were walking through a great library. The buildings are bookshelves, each floor a shelf with books. Over there stands a book about everyday life. There, an old-fashioned comedy, and scholarly works in every field. Over here, risque literature and entertaining stories. I could fantasize and philosophize about all those books. There is something of the poet in me, but not enough. Many people have demonstrated that they possess just as much as I do, and yet they don't wear a sign or a collar that says poet. Both they and I have been granted a gift from God, a blessing, large enough for ourselves, but much too small to be handed out in piecemeal to others. It appears like a ray of sunshine, filling soul and mind. It appears like the scent of a flower, like a melody that sounds familiar, yet you can't remember where it's from. On a recent evening, I was sitting in my room, and I felt like reading, but I didn't have a book, not even a page. Suddenly, a leaf, fresh and green, fell from a linden tree. The breeze brought it into my room. I examined the branching veins. A little bug was moving over them as if it wanted to make a thorough study of the leaf. That made me think about human wisdom. We too crawl around on the leaf. It's the only thing we know. And then we immediately start lecturing about the whole big tree, the roots, the trunk, and the crown. The big tree, God, the world, and immortality. Yet of the whole world we only know a little leaf. As I sat there, I had a visit from Auntie Millie. I showed her the leaf with the bug, and told her my thoughts, and her eyes lit up. "You're a poet," she said. "Perhaps the greatest we have. If it turns out to be true, I will go to my grave contented. Ever since Brewer Rameson's funeral, you've always astonished me with your tremendous imagination." That's what Auntie Millie said, and then she kissed me. Who was Auntie Millie, and who was Brewer Rameson? Chapter 2. My mother's aunt was known to us as Auntie. We had no other name for her. She gave us jam and sugar, even though they could cause great harm to our teeth. But she had a weakness for sweet children, she said. It was cruel to deny them the tiny amount of sweets that they loved so much. And that's why we loved Auntie so dearly. She had been an old maid for as long as I could remember, always old. Her age never changed. For years she had suffered terribly from toothaches, and was always talking about them. That's why her friend, Brewer Rameson, used his wit and named her Auntie Toothache. He hadn't done any brewing for the past few years, but lived on his interest payments. He often came to see Auntie, and he was older than she was. He had no teeth at all, just a few black stumps. As a child, he had eaten too much sugar, he told us children, and that's what happens. Auntie had apparently never eaten sugar in her childhood. She had the loveliest white teeth. She also used them sparingly, not even sleeping with them at night, Brewer Rameson said. We children knew that was a wicked thing to say, but Auntie told us he didn't mean anything by it. One day, at lunch, she told us about a horrid dream she had in the night, that one of her teeth had fallen out. "It means," she said, "that I'm going to lose a true friend." "What if it's a false tooth?" said the brewer with a chuckle. "If so, then it just means you're going to lose a false friend." "What an evil, uncivil old man you are," said Auntie, more angry than I've ever seen her, either before or since. Later she said that her old friend was just teasing her. He was the noblest person on earth, and one day when he died, he would become one of God's little angels in heaven. I gave a good deal of thought to this transformation and to whether I would be able to recognize him in his new form. When Auntie was young, and he was young too, he had proposed to her. She thought about it for too long and didn't make a move. Made no move for a long time, and remained an old maid, but was always a faithful friend. And then Brewer Rameson died. He was transported to his grave in the most expensive hearse and with great procession, with people in uniform wearing medals. Dressed in mourning, Auntie stood at the window with all of us children except for little brother. The stork had brought him only the week before. Then the hearse and procession passed. The street was deserted, and Auntie prepared to leave. But I didn't want to leave. I was waiting for the angel, Brewer Rameson. He had now become a little winged child of God and would have to put in an appearance. "Auntie," I said, "do you think he'll come now? Or maybe when the stork brings us another little brother, he'll bring the angel Rameson." Auntie was quite overwhelmed by my imagination and said, "That child is going to be a great poet." She repeated this during all my school years. Yes, even after my confirmation and well into my university days. She was, and is, the most devoted friend to me, when I have both poet aches and toothaches, and I have attacks of both. "Just write down all your thoughts," she said, "and put them away in your desk drawer. That's what John Paul did. He became a great poet, though I'm not especially fond of him. He doesn't excite me. You have to be exciting, and you will be exciting." The night following that speech, I lay in bed, filled with longing and agony, with a craving and desire to become a great poet that Auntie saw incensed in me. I lay there suffering from poet ache, but there is worse torment, a toothache. It mashed and gnashed at me. I became a cringing worm with an herb compress and a Spanish fly plaster. "I know what that feels like," said Auntie. There was a sorrowful smile on her lips, and her teeth gleamed so white. But I have to start a new section of the story, of my aunt and myself. Chapter 3. I moved into new lodgings and had been living there for a month. I told my aunt all about it. "I'm living with a quiet family. They don't give me a thought even if I ring the bell 3 times. And by the way, it's a house full of tumult with noise and a din of wind and storms and people. I live right above the front gate. Every cart that drives in or out makes the pictures on my wall jump. The gate slams and shakes the whole house like an earthquake. If I'm lying in bed, the jolt shudder through all my limbs. But that's supposed to be fortifying to the nerves. If the wind is blowing, and it's always blowing in this country, then the long window latches outside swing back and forth, striking the wall. The bell in the neighbor's gate in the courtyard rings with every gust of wind. The lodgers come trickling home from late in the evening until well into night. The lodgers right above me, who give trombone lessons during the day. It's the last home, and never goes to bed until he's taken a midnight stroll with heavy bootstraps and iron-shod boots. There are no double windows, but there is a broken pane over which the landlady has glued some paper. The wind still blows in through the crack, sounding like a buzzing botfly. That's my bedtime music. When I finally fall asleep, the crowing rooster soon wakes me up. The rooster and hens in the chicken coop kept by the cellar tenant announce the morning is about to arrive. The little ponies have no stable. They're tethered to the storeroom under the stairs, and they kick at the door and the paneling as I try to move about. The day dawns. The porter, who sleeps in the garret with his family, thunders down the stairs. His wooden clogs clatter, the gate slams, the house shakes, and when that's over, the lodger above me starts his exercises, lifting in each hand a heavy iron ball which he can never hold on to. They drop over and over again, while at the same time the youths of the house who are off to school come rushing out, shrieking. I go over to the window and open it to get some fresh air. It's a relief when I can get it, provided the woman in the back building isn't washing gloves in stain remover, which is how she makes a living. And by the way, it's a nice place, and I live with a quiet family. That's the summary I gave Auntie about my lodgings. I told it in a much livelier fashion, since spoken words have a fresher sound to them than written words. "You're a poet," cried Auntie. "Just write down what you told me, and you're as good as Dickens. Yes, you're much more interesting to me. You paint when you speak. You describe your house so I can see it. It makes me shiver. Keep writing. Put something alive into it. People, charming people, preferably unhappy ones." I actually did write down my description of the house, the way it stands there with all of its din and defects, but I only put myself in it without any plot. That came later. Chapter 4. One evening that winter, after the theaters had closed, a terrible storm blew in. A snowstorm that made it almost impossible to move. Auntie had gone to the theater. I was there to escort her home, but I was having trouble enough walking on my own, let alone accompanying anyone else. The hansom cabs had all been taken. Auntie lived a good distance away in the city, while my own lodgings were closer to the theater. If that had not been the case, we would have had to seek shelter in the sentry box for the time being. We staggered forward through the deep snow with whirling snowflakes rushing around us. I lifted her. I held her. I shoved her along. Only twice did we fall, but we fell softly. We reached my gate, where we shook off the snow. On the stairs, we shook ourselves again, and yet still had enough snow to cover the door and the entryway. We took off our overcoats and undercoats and every garment that could be removed. The landlady loaned Auntie dry stockings and a dressing gown. She would need them, said the landlady, and added quite truthfully that it would be impossible for my aunt to return home that night. She invited Auntie to make herself comfortable in the parlor, where she would make up the sofa in front of the connecting door to my room that was always kept locked. And that's what happened. The fire burned into my stove. The tea urn was set on the table. The little room grew quite pleasant, although not as pleasant as Auntie's parlor in the winter-time, with its thick curtains over the doors, thick curtains at the windows, and double carpets with 3 layers of thick paper underneath. Sitting there is like being in a tightly corked bottle filled with warm air, although, as I said, it was also quite pleasant in my room. The wind was whistling outside. Auntie talked about the stories in her youth reappeared. The brewer reappeared, and old memories. She could remember when I got my first tooth and how the family rejoiced. My first tooth! The tooth of innocence, gleaming like a little white drop of milk. my baby tooth. One appeared, and then more appeared, a whole row of them, side by side, top and bottom, the loveliest baby teeth, yet they were just the advanced troops, not the real ones that would last me my whole life. They too appeared, along with my wisdom teeth, the flank guards in the row, born with pain and great trouble. They'll leave again, every one of them. They'll leave before their time of service is over. Even the very last tooth will leave, and that is not a day for celebrating, that's a day for grieving. By then you're old, even though your spirits may be young. Such thoughts and discussions are not enjoyable, yet we happen to talk about all these things. We returned to my childhood years, talking and talking. It was midnight before Auntie went to bed in the parlor next door. "Good night, sweet child," she called. "I'm going to sleep as snugly as if I were in my own bed." She settled in peacefully, but there was no peace either inside the house or outdoors. The storm rattled the windows, battered the long, dangling iron latches, and rang the neighbor's doorbell in the back courtyard. The lodger upstairs had come home. He was still taking a little nighttime stroll back and forth. Then he threw off his boots and got into bed to sleep, but he snores so loudly that anyone with good ears can hear it through the ceiling. I couldn't sleep, couldn't find any peace. The weather couldn't find peace either. It was terribly lively. The wind whistled and sang in its own way. My teeth started to get lively too. They whistled and sang in their own way. They were getting ready for a bad toothache. A draft came through the window. The moon was shining on the floor. The light came and went the way clouds come and go in stormy weather. There was a restless shifting of shadow and light, but at last the shadow on the floor took shape. I looked at this moving form and felt an icy gust. On the floor sat a figure, tall and thin, like the kind a child draws with pencil on a slate, something that is supposed to look like a person. A single thin line forms the body. One line, then another forms the arms and the legs, each one line, and the head a polygon. Soon the figure grew more distinct. It was wearing a sort of gown, very thin, very fine, and it showed that the figure was female. I heard a buzzing. Was it the wind, or was it droning like a botfly through the crack in the pane? No, it was her. Madame Toothache. Her horrible highness Centania Infernalis. God save us from her visits. "How nice it is here," she hummed. "Such nice quarters. Marshy ground, boggy ground. The mosquitoes have buzzed around here with poison in their stingers. Now I have the stinger, and it has to be sharpened on human teeth. They're shining so white in this fellow in the bed. They've brave sweet and sour, hot and cold, nutshells and plum pits. But I'll smack them and whack them. I'll molt the roots with drafty gusts and give them cold feet." What a horrible speech, what a horrible guest. "Oh, so you're a poet," she said. "Well, I'm going to write you into all the verses of pain. I'm going to give you the iron and steel in your body, put fiber into all the fibers in your nerves." It felt as if a glowing awl were passing through my cheekbone. I twisted and writhed. "What excellent teeth," she said. "An organ to play on. A mouth organ concert. How splendid! With kettle drums and trumpets, piccolos and trombones in the wisdom tooth. Great poet, great music." Oh yes, she started playing, and how horrible she looked, even though I could see no more of her than her hand, that shadowy, gray, ice-cold hand with long fingers as thin as awls. Each of them was a torture instrument. Her thumb and index finger were pincers and screw. Her middle finger ended in a sharp awl. Her ring finger was a gimlet, and her little finger a syringe full of mosquito poison. "I'll teach you a metered verse," she said. "A big poet will have a big toothache, and a little poet a little toothache." "Oh, let me be little," I begged. "Let me not be one at all. I'm not a poet. I just have attacks of poetry. Attacks! Like toothaches! Go away! Go away!" "Then do you acknowledge I'm mightier than poetry, philosophy, mathematics, and all music?" she said. "Mightier than all those in painted and marvel card sensations. I'm older than all of them. I was born close to the Garden of Eden, outside where the wind blew and the damp toadstools grew. I made Eve put on clothes as cold as wind, and Adam too. Believe me, the first toothache was a powerful one. I believe everything I said. Go away! Go away! Well, if you'll give up being a poet, never set verse to paper, slate, or any form of writing material again, then I'll let you go. But I'll be back if you ever start writing. I swear, I said, if only I never see or feel you again. But you will see me, said the Madam Toothache, though in a more substantial form, one that is dearer to you than I am now. You will see me as Auntie Millie, and I'll say, "Right, my sweet boy, you're a great poet, perhaps the greatest we have. But believe me, if you start writing again, then I'll send your verses to music and play them on your mouth organ, you sweet child. Think of me when you see Aunt Millie." Then she vanished. In farewell, I got what felt like a glowing awl jabbed into my jaw, but it soon faded. I felt as if I were floating on gentle water. I saw the white water lilies with the broad green leaves droop, sink below me, wither, dissolve, and I sank with them, dissolving into peace and rest. Die, melt away like the snow, is what I heard singing and ringing in the water. Evaporate into the clouds, pass on like the clouds. Shining down through the water toward me were bright, bright names, inscriptions on fluttering victory banners and proclamation of immortality, written on the wings of a mayfly. My slumber was deep, slumber without dreams. I didn't hear the whistling wind, the slamming gate, the neighbor's doorbell ringing, or the vigorous exercises of the lodger. What bliss! Then came a gust of wind so strong that the locked door to Auntie's room blew open. Auntie leapt to her feet, pulled on her shoes, put on her clothes, and came into my room. I was sleeping like one of God's angels, she said, and she couldn't bear to wake me. I awoke on my own, opened my eyes, and had completely forgotten that Auntie was in the house. But I quickly remembered my toothache vision. Dream and reality merged into one. "You didn't happen to write anything last night after we said goodnight, did you?" she asked. "How I wish that you had. You're my poet, and you always will be." I thought she smiled so slyly. I couldn't tell if it was the real Aunt Millie, who loved me, or the horrible one, to whom I had given my promise that night. "Have you written anything, sweet child?" "No, no!" I cried. "But your Auntie Millie." She kissed me, got into the hansom cab, and drove home. Before she left, she said, "Who else?" And she was Auntie Millie. I wrote all of this down. It's not in verse, and it will never be published. And that's where the manuscript ended. My young friend, the budding delicatessen owner, couldn't find the missing pages. They'd gone out into the world as wrapping paper for salted herring, butter, and green soap. They'd fulfilled their destiny. The brewer is dead, Auntie is dead, and the student is dead, the one whose sparks of genius ended up in the bin. Everything ends up in the bin. And that's the end of the story, the one about Auntie Toothache. So it wasn't about a tooth fairy, but it certainly was about a vision of a terrifying, tooth-hating creature. So sort of right. That was really interesting. I like the moral. I like the thought of you write everything down. Everything. Your words, your finest sentiments. And when you're gone, perhaps one person will enjoy them, perhaps none. But you will have still lived. Probably, hopefully, a glorious life. Anyway. Thank you so much for joining me for another story time. I hope you liked that one. And I will see you again next week. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody. Please stay happy, healthy, and safe.